Okay, we're going to go ahead and get this going for the flock moderators. Y'all know I appreciate you so damn much. Crazy that y'all did a league, a dynasty league, that is. And yeah, there are a million trades. Going to talk about every team here. And thank y'all for everything. I mean, I know y'all hang out in the live streams with me all the time. You know I appreciate you. And if there's anything I can ever do for you, please let me know. But anyway, Jeep guys sent me the details on this. So if anything's wrong, it's Adam's fault. You go for him, not for me. 12 team, start one quarterback, two running backs, three receivers, tight end, two flex, super flex. So let me just confirm this is a 10 team. I'm sorry, start 10, 12 team super flex league, 20 bench spots, 1.5 PPR for tight end, 6-point passing touchdown. I definitely like 6-point passing touchdown formats. I think that I made the mistake in the past of whenever I would set up a dynasty league doing 4-point passing touchdown leagues. But no, 6-point, I think it's the way to go. Phenomenal setup. I would say this is probably the most standard dynasty league format you're going to see now. And it makes sense because I think it's probably the best. But because there were a million different trades in this league, I think the best way to go about this would be essentially to just look at a team by team perspective. So Adam got me the draft board. Now, I am sorry, I am not going to be able to see what rookie picks were traded in the future in terms of 2025, 2026 picks. So we're going to make this video without that information. But nonetheless, we're going to get into Zach's teams first. He goes Jalen Hurts at the 105. Makes a lot of sense. I mean, looking at the guys that he goes around, I would rather have Hurts over Harrison, who goes before. Well, we'll get to Tommy Knows' decision to take Harrison in a second. I'd rather have Hurts over Jordan Love, who goes to quarterback afterwards. Yeah, Hurts gives you the rushing upside. I mean, right now he's being drafted like QB1 in underdog drafts. You have Trevor Lawrence there at the 2-3 turn. I think that Lawrence gives you the ability to contend this year and build for the long term. Nico Collins in the middle of the fourth makes a lot of sense in comparison to the receivers he's going around. And then, yeah, I mean, if you're sitting here and at running back, you have Barkley, Cook, Pollard, Brian Robinson, Charbonnet. Running back, you're able to contend. Quarterback, you have Hurts, Lawrence, Baker. You can contend with that quarterback room. Wide receiver, you have Nico, Keon, Kupp, Diggs, Ridley. This is for sure a team that is probably looking to contend right now. Because, yeah, you are going to have some declining assets here. I mean, Jalen Hurts, while it's phenomenal setup for 2024 in particular, this is one of those rushing quarterbacks. It's difficult to project him out till he's like 35. The running backs like Cook, Pollard, Brian Robinson, Barkley. So your guy's going to be on the decline. Kupp, Diggs, Ridley, Sutton on the decline, Hopkins. Yeah, so definitely a contending team, but a team that is set up to win right now. Going over to Nick's team, gets Mahomes at the 102. I didn't even notice this a third down reversal. Okay, so that makes things very interesting here. I was going to say Drake May 302 seems a little aggressive, but getting Drake May at the 3-4 turn looks great from a long-term perspective. It may be difficult to contend with this quarterback room in the short term. If you look at implied team totals right now, New England's supposed to be the worst team in the league. But, I mean, this is a team that looks like it's set up for the long term, right? You have London, Addison, Rice, Leggett at wide receiver. You have Dontavian Wicks also going into year 2. You have a couple win now assets with like Taylor, Najee, Moss. I think that this is going to be a very interesting team because, I mean, if you are looking at this team, it seems like it's kind of in the middle here between contending and rebuilding, where I could see like, hell, what happens if Zach Moss comes out and he looks like a top 10 running back to start the season? What happens if, I don't know, Rashee Rice doesn't get suspended? Then all of a sudden it's a team that can actually contend in the short term, and you have the long-term value with these younger assets. But the issue is, what happens if Drake May doesn't produce? You get one key injury to someone like Jonathan Taylor, and then all of a sudden the wheels completely fall off. And at that point, I think you could be forced to punt and try to contend in 2025. So it is an interesting. I definitely don't think Nick's done making moves. I think that's a team that probably has to pick an identity closer to the start of the season and figure out what it's doing. Well, let's get to Tommy Knows' team. My guy, I got to give you crap for the Harrison selection. Justin Jefferson's the best wide receiver in the NFL. The guy is just starting his second contract. Going Harrison at wide receiver 1 is just so damn aggressive. I think you are just taking on a ton of inherent risk. Now, with that being said, Stroud 103, obviously super exciting. With that being said, Waddle 403, phenomenal value. He's being drafted in around 2 underdog drafts currently. Zay Flowers 510, love the value. Kyle Pitts 405. Here, I'd probably rather have Kincaid, but that's my personal take. Jonathan Brooks 603. I like him in comparison to the running backs in this range. George Pickens 607, great value. Spears 710. I don't agree with this pick either. I think Spears falls into the category of one of these guys that may perennially be like, I don't know, a backup running back committee RB. Even though Pollard looks like it's complete dust, I mean, they do give Pollard the contract. So, I mean, if I'm looking at running back here, I think I'd probably rather go through and just take someone that's going to help us contend in the short term. Go with someone like Ramondre or Derrick Henry. Or if you wanted to maybe look a little more long term, then instead I may go wide receiver and may look at Rashee Rice. This is a team that definitely looks like it can contend this year, but if it's going to contend this year, it's going to need one, with Levis to hit, and two, Jonathan Brooks' injury to not last too far into the season. If Brooks doesn't play for the first half of the year, you're either kind of going to be forced to trade for a running back or just try to contend in 2025. Now, going over to Bryson's team. Dear God, this team has a ton of picks. We're going to have to remove our face here. We have so many picks. 209, 210, back-to-back, going Breece and Daniels. Like the Breece pick, gives you the ability to contend this year. I definitely think once you go, say, a running back as your first option, you are kind of locking yourself into a contending build, but obviously Breece does give you a little more of a long-term approach in terms of the average running back, that is, sorry. Daniels 210, you can look to do either contend or rebuilds. Garrett Wilson 306, phenomenal value. I mean, getting Wilson after London, I definitely like a lot. Kyron 309, Achane 310. If you wanted running back, these were the best running backs available. Personally, I think I may opt to instead go with another quarterback. Like if you could have taken May or Tua here and locked down your quarterback position, I personally would have preferred that. DK Metcalf 505. I personally would prefer a year 2 receiver like Zay Flowers, but I'm just not a big Metcalf guy. Tank Dell 604, phenomenal value. Cousins 707, if you wanted to contend, makes a lot of sense. Blake Corum, Michael Penix. And what's really nice and what kind of saves this team as well is we just have so many shots with how many guys that we grabbed. Like how many picks did we have inside the first 13 rounds here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Having the extra picks, I do think gives us a little flexibility. Do we have a QB3 here? No, we don't have an extra starter. Yeah, so my only thing is I think you probably would have gotten some additional flexibility if we would have instead of gone like Achane or Kyron, maybe with one of those spots, going with someone like Drake May or Tua. That's personally what I possibly would have done. Now, going over to Imnors, I believe this is Michael here, unless I'm mistaken. Allen 101, obviously a dream. I would be interested to see what we had to pay for this. Kyler 208 makes a lot of sense with this core. You have the flexibility to just take value through the rest of the draft. Olave 308 gives you the flexibility to contend or punts. DJ Moore 508s, Rashad White 5. I like all these picks. Really, as I go through this video, I'm sorry if I sound like an ass, but I'm just trying to figure out what I would maybe do differently from some of these teams. I don't know if it's that helpful, me going, I like it, I like it, I like it. So looking at what we would have potentially done differently, if we're looking at Rashad White, I think Rashad White fits the mold of a running back that is probably someone that's very difficult to project out for 2025 and beyond. I think a lot of his value just comes from the opportunity he has in the short term. So what I probably would have preferred is if we were going to go with the running back at that point, I most likely would have decided to go with Barkley instead of Rashad White if we were looking short term. And if you wanted to look long term, most likely would have gone Jonathan Brooks over Rashad White. So I don't know if I would have taken White if you wanted to go running back. I think you had maybe a few more options. Mike Evans, 805 in terms of contending pieces, makes a lot of sense. I possibly, though, with only having 2 quarterbacks, would have preferred Bo Nix over Evans. But obviously, that would have been a position where it would have been more difficult to contend this season. Javonte, 908. I really don't like the Javonte selection. With Javonte in particular, I think he's very similar to Rachaad White's, and that I don't think he's talented enough where it's easy to project him for 2025 and beyond. So if we are going to go with the running back in this range, I'd probably rather ignore the age and just take someone that I want their production for in the short term. Love the Derek Carr pick in the 13th. The Jatavius, see, what I would have probably rather done is instead of going with Javonte, actually, no, Ferguson goes before you. Never mind. But still, maybe I would have rather gone like Xavier Legette, set yourself up a little more for the long term. And then as we go down, I probably would rather just soak up the value of guys like Ezekiel Elliott, Jerome Ford, Austin Eckler, James Conner, Devin Singletary in rounds 13 and 14. Especially, Zach Moss here goes in round 12. I'd probably rather have those guys than Javonte in round 9. But should definitely be a team that looks to contend this season. Going over to Rec, another team with a bunch of trades. Jefferson Gibbs out the gate. Very interesting to punt quarterback through the first 2 rounds. But you get Tua at the 402, which looks to be a big value. We go a couple more rookie receivers with Brian Thomas, Xavier Worthy in the 5th. We have Kenneth Walker in the 5th as well. Bryce Young, 6'10". What quarterbacks did we take Bryce Young ahead of? Completely fine taking Young ahead of Cousins and Levis. Bo Nix, 806. I legitimately think maybe one of the best values in this draft, especially for this team where we need both upside and just a starter at QB3. Definitely a team that looks to be a little more set up in the long term with all the rookies that we took at the beginning of the draft. And if we get to the start of the season and we were to have a slow start, I think it would potentially make sense to pivot off of Kenneth Walker and to look to send Kenneth Walker to a team that is trying to contend this year. But going over to Mark Ward's team, my guy, thank you for everything. Jordan Love, 107. This is damn aggressive. I think with Love, in comparison to someone like Burrow, while obviously Love looked great last year, you're looking at a 1-season sample where with guys like Burrow and Lamar, they're being drafted higher in redraft leagues. We have the larger sample of success as well. I remember hearing you in the live chat. I could be making this up, but I believe I've heard you have some very aggressive takes with Jordan Love. So maybe Love's your guy. I wouldn't have done it, but it is what it is. Amon-Ra St. Brown, 206. Phenomenal pick. Crazy that you get him after A.J. Brown. Tyreek Hill, 307. Strong pick if we want to contend. And once you take Tyreek Hill, I do think you have to commit to a contending build. So the Tyreek pick followed up with Ayuk. Makes sense. Followed up with ETN. I think that there are better values on the board. Like I probably would have rather gone with a tight end like Kincaid. But if you wanted to contend, which the Tyreek picks forcing our hand to, makes sense. The Goff pick makes a lot of sense post-contract extension. And we have St. Brown. Evan Ingram, 706 in the tight end premium formats. Henry, Ramadre, Kamara. This is what I like to see, that once we took Tyreek, we committed to the contending approach and we went with the veteran running backs at a discount. Like I definitely prefer taking like Derrick Henry, Ramadre in the middle of the 8th in comparison to some of those other guys that we talked about previously that may be a little bit younger at running back, but don't project out as nicely this year. Or specifically, they're not Jahmyr Gibbs. They're not Breece Hall. They're not Bijan. We can't say, oh, they're young and they'll be around for years to come. It's just tougher. So I actually really like what we did at running back. My only thing is I just can't get behind that Jordan Love price point. And going over to E.M. Schmidt, Lamar, 108, great value. I can't believe we took A.J. Brown over Amon-Ra St. Brown, though. I mean, if you're just looking at redraft leagues right now where you have Amon-Ra St. Brown going higher, and then also keep in mind, St. Brown obviously gives you the age bump too. But once you go A.J. Brown, you're committed to the contending approach. CMC, 305. Definitely a bad long-term pick, but if CMC's the RB1 this season, it can help us win this year. Kincaid 408s, great pick. Probably one of my favorite picks in the draft in a premium format. Pacheco 608, JSN 705. Yeah, and then we just hammer in the contending pieces. So I like this team. Just going back to, there's not that much to talk about just because we didn't make a ton of trades. But really, if we are going to point out anything potentially negative here, I think it would have potentially made sense to grab a QB3 instead of Jalen Wright. Like if we instead would have gone with Aaron Rodgers, since we were committed to the contending approach, I think we would have done that. And then just personally, I would have rather had someone else over A.J. Brown. Well, let's go over to April. April, always out in the stream, has been for years. Appreciate you. I appreciate everybody watching this. But anyway, Lamb Puka at the gate. I love the Lamb pick at 109. Phenomenal value there. I probably would have gone receiver as well in the second. I just think that St. Brown pick was phenomenal. I probably would have gone St. Brown instead. Dak 304 makes a ton of sense. Bowers 409 is kind of going to be up to you and what you think of Bowers as a prospect. I really do like the tight end value here. I think personally I would have maybe gone Trey McBride, but not going to fault you at all. I mean, I would even have to check my rankings. I may have Bowers ranked ahead of McBride. McCarthy 504. McCarthy versus Goff are back-to-back in my rankings currently. I think it's a very interesting decision. I don't know what the right pick is between the two. I think it really does depend if you're wanting to think short or long-term. Jacobs, Adams, Kittle, Zamir. So those followed-up picks, if we knew that we were wanting to go with those contending assets, I probably would have preferred the Jared Goff over McCarthy selections. But you maybe didn't know that you were wanting to go with the contending builds when we decided to take McCarthy there at 5. But yeah, I think obviously hindsight being 2020, but if we could get ourselves in the DeLorean and we could go back in time, I think Goff over McCarthy would probably make sense. Alex, happy to see you, my guy. Laporta 301 in a premium format makes a lot of sense. I think I would have potentially gone Purdy, but nonetheless, Devonta Smith, T. Higgins, I think that they are, at least Smith, I think is a great value there. Higgins kind of going to be up to you in your own personal projections. Lad Benson going for the long-term build. Jaden Reed, 802, gives a lot of flexibility. Love the Jaden Reed value. Deshaun Watson, 810, seems like a pick with a lot of upside in comparison to the quarterbacks that go behind him. Njoku 903, locking in some production this year. 80 Mitchell 1010. Nick Chubb 1210. I probably would have preferred James Conner over Chubb. And just a simple rule of thumb, like if we are thinking about these assets that look to be like 1 to 2 year plays, an easy thing that we can do is just go pull up redraft ADP, literally just look at underdog ADP and go, okay, James Conner's being drafted X amount of rounds ahead of Nick Chubb. I should probably go James Conner over Chubb in Dynasty just because, I mean, they're both only 1 year options regardless. But Singletary 1307, this is a great team. This is a team that definitely looks to contend this year, which it is an interesting spot in that we maybe look to pivot off a couple of these rookies, but I'm assuming we also have additional future picks considering the fact that we sold our first rounder. Now, T-Bird starts it off with Caleb Bijan, Purdy. Honestly, love this start. Rome 404, love it. Kelsey 502. This is interesting. Obviously, when you go 4 rounds in, starting off Caleb, Purdy, Rome, Bijan, you put yourself in a position where you have a ton of flexibility in the middle rounds here. And then you just pot commit to the contending approach, where we have Kelsey, Debo, Mixon, Keenan. The Mixon 702 pick I don't like in comparison to the receivers. I'd probably rather have some wide receivers in this range, especially once we took Bijan at 202 and we had that top guy locked up. But then getting Geno 10-11, Chase Brown in the 12th. I love this team. Specifically that Purdy pick at the 302 and the way that we started this draft. Really, the only thing is
I don't know if leaning into the contending builds in the middle rounds was the natural course for this team, because I think maybe there's a little more value in this draft in particular in the younger names. But I could be overthinking it. Going over to Jeep Guy, who went out there and got his cornerstone pieces. Got Burrow at the 110, took Chase 112, took Anthony Richardson. I should have known last year that Jeep Guy was a Giants fan. Learned this year. So we see him go Malik Neighbors to 11. Let's see who you should have taken over Neighbors. Lawrence, Laporta, Purdy. I think I'd probably make an argument over Neighbors. But in terms of wide receivers, if you wanted to go Neighbors over London, Wilson, Tyreek, Olave, I'm not going to fault you. You probably didn't need to trade to the 211 to get Malik Neighbors. I think you possibly could have got him a little bit later. But then going Pittman 412 here, I personally probably would have preferred like DJ Moore. DeAndre Swift 612. This is another example. Just essentially taking a step back with this draft. The values that I didn't like in this draft were the veteran running backs that project out to be RB2s that went in rounds like 5, 6, 7. The values that I didn't like in this draft were like Rashad White's, maybe Kenneth Walker, Tajay Spears, Joe Mixon, DeAndre Swift. If we wanted to go running back here in the middle rounds, because running back's so difficult to project out in the long term, I think the correct play was to go after the guys like Barkley that could be elite in the short term, even if we don't love them in the long term. And if you whiffed on those guys, maybe instead just waiting to get like James Conner in the 13th, Devin Singletary in the 13th. So here, not a big fan of DeAndre Swift in the 6th. I think I probably would have preferred going with the wide receiver with this pick. But like Aaron Jones at the 10-12, I think like that's the perfect price point for that profile of a running back with where they're going. But I think that I think we talked about every team here. I hope that we are able to shine some light of my unsolicited, unwarranted opinion. It's always much easier to look at it, hindsight 2020, where it's much tougher to actually make the pick when you're on the clock. But appreciate y'all. And as always, if there's anything I can do for you, please reach out to me. By far and away, the easiest place to reach out to me will be on Discord. So if you ever want anything, shoot me a Discord DM. And yeah, thank you for everything. Really do appreciate you. And really hope I get to see you out in a live stream sometime soon.